Welcome to another episode of Cisilien's podcast. My name's Greg Ashton. I'm an account director here working in commercial sales, joined by Samuel Baxter, who's one of our solution architects within the modern workplace division. And I think today, Sam, we're touching on devices and modern workplace and what considerations customers need to think about in this day and age.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, and thanks for introducing me, Greg. No need for me to introduce myself now, so that's good. At least you know what I do, so that's nice. So the agenda for today is really to talk about Surface devices, Microsoft Surface, understand where that might fit into an organisation's plans for the future, because it has changed a lot, and we've kind of bypassed one crucial point, which is the Windows 10 end of life, which was the 14th of October. So a lot of organisations will have either made their shift to Windows 11, or they are doing the support to extend that, or they've missed that and they're playing completely in the danger zone and they've got unsupported devices. So hopefully that's not the case for people. So really, those who still need to make the shift, they have some choices around how they're going to approach it. So that can be either they, move everything up in their own time, at their own speed. That obviously has its own risk. And one of the methods to do that is to replace the device. A lot of older devices, especially stuff that's pre-2020. So when obviously there was a big panic and everyone bought a load of devices because everyone needed to start working from home. Give everyone laptops.
Seems so long ago, that crazy period when everybody started working from home.
Yeah, I can barely remember the trauma. Those devices, some of them aren't compatible with Windows 11. For those techies in the know, it requires a multitude of things. One of those being a TPM 2.0 chip. Trying not to glaze over, essentially a lot of devices that are older don't have that and therefore cannot support Windows 11.
Is there something to consider around the RAM as well? 16 gig is probably the minimum now to run Windows 11, where there's probably a number of devices out there still on 8. Is that a consideration or not really?
So more to do with the modernisation of applications as well. So they've become certainly more memory hungry, trying to do more. And I think it's a good point, because later on, a part to touch on is really going to be around that AI piece and devices using NPUs these days, so neural processing units, which are designed specifically to handle AI workloads. But really, where you start using those day-to-day things, such as in Teams, using background blur, motion sensing, noise cancellation, these things are really quite intensive on the hardware. So that's where people's devices start to creak. And so part of the consideration really is refreshing those devices, whether they're old or when they just need to move to Windows 11. So that's the point we're going to address today, one of the points, and we'll talk around that really.
Great. Well, looking forward to it. Thank you.
So the question really is, why Surface? So I think it's worth noting, a lot of organisations will have their preferred vendors. That's cool. We're not here to force anyone to change anything, but what we want to do is at least give them the consideration, the choice to have the numbers and the figures, and be armed to make that decision. Especially if historically they haven't had a great experience with them, or they're looking. The last 5 years there's been a massive shift in working practices. Whether we're talking about just working from home and having something that needs battery power to last, because I know that's a big thing, especially those devices start to creak. And I think, we talked to some of our customers before, and they go, I get about 4 hours out of this device, right, before it goes to sleep. And if you're a worker who is out and about, you're out, you maybe work for a council, you're going to see people, or you're working roadside, things like that, and you need a device just to update, do things, then it doesn't really go the distance and last. So a consideration there is that battery power, really, to make sure that things go.
And I suppose, as you say, there's lots of vendors, there's lots of options for customers to consider. And I think there's still a feeling of looking at the initial cost of purchase. You can get a device for £400-500 if you wanted to, and then there's also devices for £800-900. But you might have to refresh that cheaper device more frequently than the longer one. The battery life, as you allude to, might be lasting longer. So you shouldn't be so held up even on the initial layer, because it might pay forward to spend a little bit more at the beginning.
Yeah, buy cheap, buy twice. I think that's the thing, isn't it? But there's a few considerations around that. So one of them being, when we think about devices and fleet and keeping them up to date and doing all these other things, our considerations for buying them have largely been around upfront cost. You're exactly right. You look at two laptops and you go, well, this one's 500 quid, so that will probably be fine.
Good enough.
But more of the good enough. But more of the evolving model has really been that total cost of ownership. So that's where we're looking at a device and figuring out, how does that work? How does that fit into the organization? And what are some of the sort of hidden costs and drawbacks there? So things like deployability, have you got a device that doesn't integrate well with things like autopilot, if that is your backbone for device provisioning? And therefore, you end up with a large number of issues and you have to troubleshoot them when you're deploying devices, maintaining Windows updates, things like that, where it's not native to the device. So you end up having to spend a lot of time remediating those. So that's time for your help desk to spend time fixing that, which is lost time there. And then for the user, that downtime too. Or, if they've got to spend, if you send the device to them and it spends a day provisioning because it's not done correctly, that's it. You stack that up over time, and actually you're starting to see a different kind of cost rather than a direct upfront cost. I think one of the other things to talk about there really is sustainability, which is obviously massive as well. So a lot of Surface is really leading in that field around sustainability. It's a very transparent model where you're looking at heavily recycled materials, heavily recycled aluminium for the aluminium alloy for the components, recycled cobalt for the batteries. I think they've even they do even have their ocean mouse, which is made from recycled ocean plastics, that sort of thing. And really the thing there is, as well as everything else changing, organisations are really going to have to work towards those ESG goals.
Yeah.
And a large part of that is your fleet. So thinking about your devices and actually making them work for you instead of against your goals. So a lot of the commitments around Microsoft is around that net zero goal. So as those, if you go and look to refresh that, and we've done those customers as well, it makes a massive impact on shooting for those net zero goals. So really, if you factor that into a total cost of ownership argument, you go with the cheap laptop, but further down the line, you're going to be paying for that in carbon offset and other things where you haven't accounted for that. So really, what is that cost of ownership end to end? So lots of different things to consider there. I think probably one of the things for people who are familiar with Surface is that there was a long-standing thing about basically they weren't repairable at all, or they had a lack of repairability.
Because you couldn't open
them, couldn't do anything, super glued together for life. But that has changed in the more recent models. We went to a demo where they were doing it, and that was really great. They if you get a new one and you look at it now and you take you open it up, there are so many replaceable parts where there's a fault, and there's a QR code on every single bit that links you to a video to guide you on how to replace it. So they've really made it super easy to do, which is really nice. So they did one of those demos where they had someone from the audience go and do it for the first time whilst the person was giving the talk about how easy it is to repair a part.
And a live demo went well for once.
Live demo actually worked.
Good.
I didn't power it on, so maybe it didn't. But yeah, no, it's all good. But I guess the point there is that there's a feedback. The feedback is generally heard and fed back into the future iterations of the model.
And one thing around back to total cost of ownership, residual value is another element to consider now as well. as you said, buy cheap, buy twice, spend a bit more, and at that refresh cycle, whether that be 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, there are companies in the circular economy now where you can sell back your legacy devices to then put forward some money for your new investment. And last time I checked, I think Surface devices hold a higher residual value than other devices. Is that something that still rings true?
Absolutely. And I think, it's two approaches that an organisation can take really, which is they either go down the leasing route with having a sort of regular 3 or 4 year device refresh cycle, they match warranty and things against that. And then at the end of that period where they have to give the device back, you're right, it's a residual value thing. So that, anyone who's done a car on finance knows, but you're maintaining that value so that actually the cost, the monthly payment costs are lower when you compare it to something like a cheap laptop, where if you went and leased that, at the end it's worth nothing. So really that, it does definitely makes it a more attractive model. And then to the other point you made, it's if they bought it and wanted to do a buyback thing after a certain amount of time to give them more control over the device so they weren't on a lease, if that doesn't fit their organisational model, then you're right, you get to the same period and you're going to be able to get more for that device because it holds that value compared to some of the other cheaper models. I think it's probably worth also addressing the reason you might choose to go Surface and what kind of organisation that fits into. And it's no secret, if you're adopting Microsoft services, so if you're heavily invested in things like M365, then Surface makes sense from a native perspective. It's got that same Apple model where they own the hardware, they own the operating system, the software that's deploying to it, compared to other vendors where, they've got the hardware and then the operating system has to kind of try and work on that hardware. Everything that's developed from a Windows 11 perspective, everything's developed from a M365 apps perspective. So Office, Word, Excel, those sorts of things, they're built to work on Surface. Surface is the testing ground that they do for that. When you think about Windows updates as well, drivers is a massive thing. If you're running if you're in the EUC team, you're running that, the issues that you run into with drivers and deploying and having to roll back and things like that certainly become an issue on some of the other vendors and models and things like that. So having that native end-to-end is important distinction, because it's you're adopting the same ecosystem, so you're reducing that friction between the services on the surfaces.
Easy for you to say.
Oh God, I know. And I think that leads into a point about where the future of the technology is going, because Copilot is obviously part of the M365 stack, and that ties in with the new devices. So those AI Copilot Plus PCs,
Copilot really got the button on the keyboard for Copilot.
The button, that's all that matters. But for those unfamiliar, those new devices coming out, those Copilot Plus PCs are devices with NPUs, so neural processing units on, that are specifically designed to deal with AI workloads. So I mentioned those earlier, outside of what you'd expect around generative AI models, it's things that you use day to day. It's the background blur, it's the camera repositioning, it's the noise cancellation in things like Teams that is very intensive on the device. So what you end up seeing, I believe the stat is something like, for a CPU to try and run those workloads that are designed for AI instead of an NPU, from a power perspective, from its intensity, it's about 14 times more. So when you put that in the perspective of like, hey, I've been running this thing and actually my lap's getting a bit hot because the laptop's heating up.
That might be why.
That, and with mobile working, hybrid working, that battery consideration, again, it's just going to eat through that compared to if you've got an NPU. So the stat is that for Copilot Plus PC, you want an NPU and around 40 tops. So that's trillion operations per second that it can process, which is faster than me usually. But
are other vendors doing Copilot ready devices with MPU versus CPU? Or is the Surface the first to do that?
Yeah, so other vendors are absolutely, but it comes back to that piece around native integration, right? Because Microsoft are going to be developing the Copilot services for devices on Surface, as opposed to having them integrate afterwards. Yeah. So it's really about future-proofing yourself against that.
They might have a slight advantage over the others, seeing as they have the software and the Copilot.
Yeah, it's the end-to-end ownership. Yeah, and that's really where you see the benefits, and fewer things kind of falling down the gaps in between and causing issues. I think probably the other thing to talk about is the fact that today a lot of that power, that MPU, that AI processing power does go for those team services, for other things like that that's local, but it's really about paving the way for that agentic AI piece. So a lot of organizations have moved away from owning apps. There's a lot of move towards SaaS. That's really no secret. Everyone's got those services, and those SaaS organizations,
software as a service, for people that
thanks, Greg,
that don't know.
Yeah, I wasn't just calling you sassy. So yeah, they're all moving towards that AI model as well. I mean, I had a demo for a new product the other day, and it was like, here's the dashboard, and also there's an AI integration button at the top to ask questions. So it's all going there, and it will get to a point where you're developing those to push agents onto to end user machines, and that might be something like what's called a small language model. So that's something that could be run locally on the device instead of having to call out to the internet to do it. And when that happens, you'll really need something like an NPU to start moving that along, to not cook your device, basically.
Yeah. Is it still 3-year cycle, 5-year cycle, or subject to clients' preference? Because as we said earlier, 2019, 2020 is 6-7 years ago now. So we are hitting a bit of a milestone, especially as you mentioned before, Windows 10 to 11 happening October last year. So it really is now, isn't it, that I would imagine a large quantity of customers are looking at this type of conversation.
Yeah, it's going to be around how the firefighting's going for the EUC teams, the number of devices that are just breaking, and also from we haven't even talked about the user experience, right?
No.
Because
and the use cases for those
departments. That's probably the top thing to have talked about, because really a bad experience on a device is just terrible for the end user. I think especially with the mobility of employees these days, there's a lot of options to look, to change between organizations and stuff. And I think, day one, when you turn up with the nacho dust machine that's been built by IT and it's got all of that stuff in it, you open it up and you're like, oh my God, they must not think very much of me if they've given me this. Is a massively different experience to having a device that is shiny and new and has things like a touch screen and all the other bells and whistles, and just working and not creaking, not being like the fifth hand me down in an organisation. And in
the world that we live in, with the younger generation of people having an expectation of tech working, I think to retain staff and to keep a positive culture within the organisation, the devices is important. As you say, it's on your first day, you'll have a quick change of opinion if you get a 5-time hand-me-down versus the latest and greatest tech. So
yeah, exactly.
So I think use cases are really important, and aligning the type of device to the individual in the department. There's executives that work predominantly in office spaces. There's people in the vans driving about that need more of a portable mobile device. And what we've done in the past, specifically myself, I was involved with a device refresh for one of my clients in local government. a few thousand devices with 30, 40 different departments within the organisation, that not each of them, but a large majority of them had specific requirements, and the device that they had previously didn't execute on certain elements, and there was, as you say, a level of frustration. So what the council wanted to do before investing in a large amount of money for a device refresh was to ensure that what the users were missing today was to be taken into consideration for the device refresh, which obviously we help with. So I think that's an important thing to consider as well.
Yeah, and I think whatever you pick, it has to be the right fit. Like, vendor aside, if it's the wrong type of device for the person, then it's just going to be a pain, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, if you're out on the road and you've got this massive, heavy,
terrible battery.
Yeah, well, even if it's got a good battery, I'd resent lugging it around all day
when
I'm only going to use it for like 5 minutes, and vice versa. If I'm in the office all day and I've got something that's quite like a small form factor, so in Surface world, you've got the Surface laptop, which is like a 13.5 or 15-inch model, which is great for the information workers, people who are working at desks. You've got the Pro, which is the 2-in-1, and that's got some cool stuff going on with it now. You've got a Bluetooth keyboard, which I quite enjoy. I don't know how good your site has to be if you want to take it back. Basically, you don't have to be up like this typing anymore. You can detach it and you can type from your lap or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So that's quite cool. But if you're on the move, if you've got to do presentations, that sort of thing, you can go with one of those. Surface Laptop Go. So that's some of the smaller form factors. That is actually quite good. If you're out and about, or you've got to, in the case of council, if you're going out and making home visits and things like that, and you need to type up notes.
Yeah. Good price point as well.
That's
quite a competitive price point.
It's on the lower end, isn't it? It's on the lower end of the price bit, but it doesn't really compromise on the quality, I suppose, which is a bit of a thing to say. But I know that when we were sizing up for the council, we're talking about his battery life on this, it's still a really key consideration for the majority of users within a council who aren't dealing with the public, to have that last, so they don't have to switch to a pen and paper, and write it all down and then power it up and then write it all up later, because they work hard enough. So there's no point in. It's unfair to make them work even more, right? So I think having that where it can last a day or it can last 2 days actually without having to charge it is really important. But yeah, absolutely. Going in and sitting with different department leads and understanding, what is going to work best for yourselves. I think the other thing to talk about and touch on in that use case was that the Surface devices are really great when we talked about natively integrating across the stack, but one of the really important things and powerful things that Surface does that other vendors don't with Intune is that you have a thing called direct firmware configuration interface. So typically, if you wanted to do anything on the firmware on a device, you would have to do that with it sat in front of you. But Microsoft's ability to do that through Intune allows you to deploy and make those changes. So really, you don't use that total cost of ownership. You're reducing the need for further hands-on intervention by the IT teams. And using that to do something like everyone's phone's the same, right? Where you're like, I've had this for a couple of years and the battery's dying and now I've got to do it. But new phones have those features where you can put controls in place where it goes, okay, if it's below, if it gets towards 50%, don't charge it. If it gets over 85%, don't charge it, because the thing that shreds a battery is going up and down all day. And you can put those controls in place. So actually, when you're looking at devices that are 3 or 4 years old, when they were like, hey, I'm going to last for 17 hours, and now they barely last 6, that's because of that burnout. So you can put those controls in place to add longevity to the device. Yeah, exactly. So it's really, and when you're thinking about organisations that maybe work with defence or security or things like that, where actually, they have to, removing the camper and things like the old school way, but detaching the camera essentially through the firmware interface so it can't interact with anything. Those are all key things that you can start doing and deploying that way to make everyone's life a lot easier.
Yeah.
'Cause that's what we want, right? We want everyone's life to be easier. Everyone's got a job to be getting on.
Life's hard enough.
Don't I know it?
Yeah, you at least want your device to work every day.
Yeah, I know.
Fine. So, you know, when clients are considering a device refresh, first and foremost, the first agenda is to align persona mapping use cases, understanding what went wrong previously to make sure that the next investment is fit for purpose. That's the starting point, irrelevant of vendor.
Yeah, and I think probably it's good if you're coming up to that point. It's good to ask the questions. Really, you know, you're thinking, okay, well, are we heavily M365 based? Are we invested in the Microsoft ecosystem? If yes, Surface is a good consideration. You know, have we had a good experience with our vendors, or could we actually look at something new? We've got a lot of complaints about the devices. And in terms of our AI on work journey, what tools are we investing in? What do we want to do going forwards? Because if it's, once again, stuff like Copilot or, you know, things that you're building in Foundry, then you're going to want to look at having those NPUs.
So look, you know, we as Cisilion utilise the Surface devices. You know,
Sure do.
Exactly one we made earlier there. No, but personally, you know, I'm grateful for having technology like that. You know, I've recently been upgraded to the 15-inch size laptop, which is great for me. You know, it really works.
Yeah.
Size does matter.
Couldn't help yourself, could you?
Couldn't help myself.
Or, to the other point, you know, age matters too.
Exactly.
Give yourself a big screen so you can see.
My eyes are slowly going. Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Great. Well, you know, I don't know if there's anything more to discuss or to consider, but
we've covered a lot, really. The sort of, you know, the Surface portfolio. What are the big considerations? All of that stuff around total cost of ownership.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the move to NPUs and those AI workloads, and why Surface is definitely a good consideration for that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think they're all the key points. So,
persona mapping being, you know, the first point to address when clients are considering this, because, you know, if mistakes were made on previous refreshes to certain departments of your organisation, at this time it's important to make sure you get it right next time.
Yeah. And
the device is important for the user. If it doesn't work, if it's slow, you get a bad user experience. You might not be able to retain the staff that you've worked hard to acquire, and it's definitely an important element of modern work today.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you, Sam. It's been a worthwhile time, and appreciate your time with us today.
Yeah,